This project was built around an idea and two limitations. The idea is that I have these organizer bins that I use in the workshop, as well as taking them out for workshops and summer camps that I run. And the limitations were that I wanted to build this project out of completely scrap material and shoot it, the project video, using nothing more than the 50mm lens on my camera. So this project started with ripping down some scrap plywood that I had and getting it sized so that I could lay out the organizer bins and start to make a rack and organizer to keep them in. The idea was that I wanted to be able to take out multiple cases at once for things like the summer camp that my wife and I are going to be teaching in a couple of weeks this summer, as well as the mini maker fair that is coming up in Ann Arbor in a week or so. So here you can see me laying out 3 of those, trying to get a sense of how tall that would need to be, and then starting to get this piece of plywood cut to the right shape. Now, before I started this, I had nothing more than a really rough sketch, and I was trying to use the organizers themselves as a way to kind of lay out and make the measurements for them. As you'll see throughout the course of the video, having not much of a plan ended up posing some challenges and led to having to do some problem solving throughout the course of this. For the most part though, I had a pretty good sense of what I wanted to do. The side panels would get dados in them to accept the bottom and top panels, and I figured this would make that a nice strong bit of construction while also making it relatively easy. So I'm taking the 2 side panels and cutting dados in them at the table saw, inching the fence over a little bit at a time to make that wide enough to accept the top and bottom pieces. And here I'm just cleaning the dados out with a chisel to make sure that I got a nice tight fit without any of the waste from the dados in there. After doing a little test fit, I was pretty happy with that, so I cleaned up the other dado and then did a test fit on that side as well. And that turned out pretty well. I was pretty happy with how tight the dados were for accepting the top and bottom panels. Once I had cut those dado slots in both the left and right panels, it was time to assemble and glue up. So I'm just putting some glue in both of those dados and then getting each of the panels fit into place. I used a couple of long bar clamps to hold these in place while I got the initial assembly together, and then I slid the top panel in place just to keep everything square. With the clamps holding it in place, I went back with my air nailer and added brad nails to keep the frame all together as the glue set up. And there you can see the frame's basic assembly is together. Now, one thing I needed to make sure was that this was square, so I clamped a speed square to my bench and clamped the piece to that so that it could set up square as the glue dried. Now I needed to make a back panel for the whole case assembly, so a stop block on the miter saw station helped me cut another piece of scrap plywood down to roughly the right size, and I ended up using 2 panels of this and then trimming them to size at the table saw so that they would be approximately each half of the height of the organizer rack. And you can see me ripping those down to size there. And I just want to make sure that those are the right height so that they take up the back panel of the organizer rack. Now I'm doing the layout where I'm actually marking out where the organizer cases are going to sit in there, because I realized after I had assembled all this, adding those dados for the top and bottom panels meant that instead of adding rails inside for the cases to slide in and out on, that I actually needed to cut dados for the racks to slide into in the case. And if I had thought of doing this earlier, I would have done those dados earlier on instead of doing it after the case was mostly assembled. But like I said, I didn't have too much of a plan going in. Here I'm just doing a test fit with some of the organizer cases to see how they fit, and they fit pretty well. Now I needed to make some handles for this because, like I said, this will be a case that I'm going to be taking out around, so it has to be portable, and I figured the easiest way to do this was to add some handles. So I just marked out what felt like about the right width for my hand, drilled 2 holes with a Forstner bit, and then marked across there, and then went back with the jigsaw to cut out the space in between those to make a simple handle. Here I'm just using a round over bit in the handheld router to smooth that out and make it a more comfortable surface. Now I can finally add the top panel to this assembly and actually glue it in place. So I've got some glue in those dados, and I'm just sliding this top panel into place. It's exactly the same construction as the bottom panel, a couple of clamps to hold it in place, and then coming back in with the air nailer in just a minute here to really get everything nice and tight so that that can set up nice and square. This was another place where I realized I needed to do some problem solving during the course of making this case. I wanted to have the bottom panel and the top panel be flush with the ground. And because I had those dados in there that were holding the top and bottom panels up, that wasn't going to be the case. So I ended up creating some strips from the same plywood that the panels were all made out of themselves, and then going back and just cutting a little rabbet in each of those strips so that I could mount it in between the side panels and basically bring the top and bottom panels out to flush so that the bottom of it would sit on those instead. And on the top panel, it gives me a surface to add on a little work surface, which was kind of a late decision and a late addition. So here you can see me putting some glue on one of those strips and starting to add it to either the top or the bottom panel here. I'm not sure which one it is. Basically, I just got some glue on those strips and then clamped them in place so that that glue could set up. And the bottom panel doesn't really need much additional reinforcement there. The top panel, however, you'll see gets an additional treatment that you'll see in just a minute here. Basically, once I get these clamped in place, that glue can set up, and this is about where I left it in day one so that it could set up and be ready for the next day of adding that next part. With those strips glued on and the clamps taken off, I was ready to add the back panel on the next day. So here's the first of that piece of scrap plywood being added, and then the second piece being added as well. Same exact construction here, just glue, and then brad nails to hold the whole thing in place. Now, as I had been thinking about this, I realized that having a little work surface on top of this would make a lot of sense so that it wasn't just something to carry these racks around in, but it could be used to do work on as well. And I realized that I had some scrap particle board that had melamine on top of it, which makes a really nice work surface. The melamine stuff tends not to stick to the melamine very well. So I just ripped a couple of those pieces down to size and did a little glue up of those two pieces. I made this intentionally a little oversized compared to the rest of the rack so that I would have kind of a front and back lip. And I liked that idea so that I could rest the cases on there. I wanted to trim these out, so I took some scrap plywood that I had and cut those pieces down, and that would essentially become like a trim piece or a skirt piece around there, and would also help hold the melamine top onto the rest of the organizer case. So here I'm getting the sides and the front and back rails glued onto that melamine top, and this will eventually get reinforced with brad nails as well once it's added to the organizer case. I sanded it down and got it ready for some finish. And originally, when I first started this project, I thought of finishing it like a traditional Rhodes case like you might use for a musical instrument, with black and possibly industrial hardware for that. My daughter suggested that I try this sparkly gold spray paint, and after I sprayed the first coat, I realized that there was no way it was going to work on its own. So I ended up adding a brown base coat of spray paint. And then I went back and actually added a top coat of gold spray paint over it. And since I was using gold anyway, I decided to use gold for the stencil that I did for this. This is a piece that I'll take out, so it's nice to have the workshop branding on there. That part I'm really happy with. The rest of the brown and sparkly gold finish kind of makes me think of a set of 70s Ludwig drums. I think I like it, and I think it's going to grow on me. It's not the finish I would have chosen initially, but again, this project is about embracing limitations and trying stuff, so it worked out just fine for that. I took the palm sander and rounded over some of those really sharp edges on the trim pieces and ended up with a very nice, smooth, touchable surface, one that's not going to ding my hands up as I grab racks out of here or move this case around. A little bit of lemon oil and beeswax finish on the skirt pieces, and that part was basically done. Now I can load the rack up with the organizers and try it out for the first time. All three fit in really nicely. I really like the fact that I can pull an organizer out set it on that top work surface, and then easily find the part that I'm looking for, and then just slide the organizer right back into the rack. Adam Savage, in one of his recent talks, spoke about how every project that a maker undertakes never turns out exactly as it's planned. It's either better or worse, but somehow different, and this project was absolutely an example of that for me. Thanks for watching.